This video is called The Top Girls of Asiamnesia, From Visibility to Representation, and it will talk about Sun Mi-chomit's play, Asiamnesia. I first want to talk about the difference between visibility and representation. I think the difference between these two concepts are that the first, visibility, means to be able to be seen, and the person visible is not the subject, but an object, and the action of seeing is being done by an external factor, an external being. On the other hand, representation means to show, and here, now the person is the subject, doing the showing. So with this difference in mind, the question I want to throw out first is the Asian woman in American culture visible or represented? Let's look at the history of Asian women in the Western entertainment industry. First, Anna May Wong. She is a very famous Asian actor, but ironically, she wasn't even casted as the lead female role in an all-Chinese movie. And instead, she was given a seductress role, but she refused. Maybe the next Asian woman that pops into mind is Madame Butterfly, who is supposed to be the subservient, mute Asian woman, and Puccini's fragile butterfly longing for her master to come back. And even within 80 years, almost a century later, still the same narrative of Asian women is being produced and consumed. Miss Saigon, the sexual prowess, is a tragic tale of a doomed romance involving an Asian woman abandoned by her American lover. And this furthered the trope of the hypersexualization of the dragon lady. These characters are the most famous representations, even up to this day, of Asian American actresses. And all of these are cultural remnants that even to this day define the presence of Asian women on stage. The first modern movie to have an all-Asian cast, Crazy Rich Asians, was produced only a few years ago. And so even with this very limited and very small timeline I've shown you here, we can see that Asian women are visible, but not represented. But underrepresentation is just a simple and easy answer. Asiamnesia, a play written by the Korean-American playwright and actress Sun Mi-chomit, is a play where Asian-American actresses of different eras come together to talk about and deal with their experiences. And this takes a closer look to this convoluted cultural entanglement of Asian women on screen that history has tightly wound up, and tries to untie the strings and make sense of it all. What exactly is it that silences them, and can they break out? I broke this matter down into a series of questions that we can use to analyze the play with. Asiamnesia. The first question is, how are Asian American women depicted to be visible but underrepresented? What are their struggles? There are obvious historical reasons, as I briefly mentioned before, but how does this play portray this? The most powerful depiction of this comes right from the beginning of the play, where a woman named Afong May, who was actually a real historical figure from China, is basically put on an exhibition. And she is portrayed not as an individual person to interact with, to see as a person, but just as an object of fascination, and thus just for exhibition and also for ostracization. It's a very voyeuristic scene in which she is literally an exhibition and everything is silent. But the only words spoken are her few words in Chinese, which only further serves to ostracize her as the other. She is visible. She is the most visible one can get as an exhibit meant to be seen. But it is not a representation. It's a type of ostracization to the foreign, to the abnormal, to the other, for mere entertainment. The next factor is the presence of the protagonist, Sarah, and this character is supposed to be played by different actors within the play, which just signifies that her experience is the experience of all Asian American women. And the name Sarah itself is very interesting because Sarah is one of the most common, least conspicuous, most traditional white names. But because of its somewhat ubiquitous usage, ironically, it's also the most commonly chosen name by immigrants who want to fit in. And this leads to the concept that to survive is to somewhat sacrifice identity. And even in modern times, that history of sacrifice of identity is still being trickled down to current identities and portrayals of Asian Americans. So then the next question we can ask is why? Why are these Asian American women visible yet underrepresented? What is the catalyst? This question is a hard one to unravel, but simply put, the play seems to map the root of the whole problem back to the vicious cycle of the Hollywood ecosystem. Hollywood is where the silver screen and silicon are idolized, according to the play. Anna, the character Anna Wong Mei in the play, tells Sarah, the main character, that in Hollywood it is more important to seem virtuous than to be virtuous. So seeming, visibility, is more important. It's more practical than being, existence, which is at the core of representation. And to show what is, not seems. And for Asian American female actors, what seems is a choice between only two options: the domineering, sexually corrupt dragon lady, or a silent, meek, and helpless butterfly. But this is an ecosystem, meaning there is more than one player. And the other players in this ecosystem are the helpless, exasperated, need to put food on the table and pay the bills Asian actresses who have no choice but to succumb to the stereotypical roles portrayed on screen. As depicted through Asiamnesia, women experience common dilemmas in the business of theater. There are other women actively taking part in the capitalist system of exploiting vulnerable young women. I want to take this idea and break it into subparts, saying that there are two types of this kind of women taking part of the capitalist system. One who knows this but can't help it, and the other who is ignorant and relishes upon the system without knowing. The first type would be women like Barb, the woman who works at the acting job finding company. Barb wants originality, but knows that what these people want from Asian actors, Asian American actors, are stereotypes. She says, "It's what sells. It'll pay your bills." And it's her livelihood as the head of the Asian Actors Agency to feed off of this stereotype. The next type of women who take part in the capitalist system are women like the young Han Yu, the little girl who comes out at the end of the play to ask Sarah why her acting career kind of failed. And what she says to Sarah is, "We all look the same, right? We gotta do karate to be famous and break hearts." And these young women who don't know enough of about the system that it's feeding off of the stereotype, they devour and relish in the stereotype because it's the only representation of the Asian American woman they see on screen. It's the only person they can identify with. And these young minds cannot see it as a problem, but only as flashing lights of shallow fame. Perhaps this ecosystem feeds off of the model minority complex, so that Asian Americans, when we see this problem arising, they cannot help but just be complacent and passive, and this problem is not brought up and thus is forgotten. And this builds and seeps into the whole picture of the general consciousness of the American public, the age amnesia, where Anna, who is said to be always existed as illusions in other people's minds, she will continue to be so, along with so many other Asian actresses, if there is no action. And these top girls in scene 2 of the play are actually just not top girls, but just the forgotten girls. And even Sarah, the protagonist, who is current and even nominated for an Oscar, according to the play, is dismissed by critics who say that she is among the women that are famous today, but might not be remembered tomorrow. And this vicious cycle of a legacy of loss, a loss of memory, a loss of control, and it is essentially a loss of representation. This cycle is vicious. It has victims, and it is dangerous. Then the question we can ask is, so what can you do? What can happen in this vicious cycle that can break it? When all hope seems lost, Chomet beautifully presents how even within the ultimate submission of scene 5, the voiceless visibility of underrepresentation, there is something visceral and alive about fighting. In scene 5, in the sequence, Asian women, although momentarily trapped in the racist capitalist industry of show business and the moral dilemma of playing the stereotypical roles or not, reveals their agony through monologues and arias. Chomet invokes audiences' attention to the Asian woman performer's struggle through inserting her production notes of accompanying percussive sound to their physical movement, thus highlighting the Asian actress's moral ethical dilemma as a climax. So through dance and physical community of a choreographed dance between 4 women, there is still a channel to voice their agony. A type of physicality and strength that comes with mourning and oppression is expressed here as a way to express themselves. Furthermore, there is also solidarity. I quote within the play, "If only the yellow girl knew about La Choi-san, maybe she wouldn't grow up feeling like herself in that moment. Toes at the crossroads between two roads, America, Asia, never quite in one, never knowing about the other. Maybe she wouldn't waste so much time worrying about how her one bang falls across her forehead. But this is 1979, and she is the only Asian in the whole second grade. But someday she'll wake from the gray haze of childhood and remember who they are and who she is. One of them. Someday, somewhere. This calls for representation to be the bridge between identities, to assert the presence and existence of the Asian American female identity, to show and know that yes, Asians do belong, and Asians are real people with real personalities and real thoughts. The play ends with a young girl jump roping, signifying the ongoing struggle. But it may not be quite so much a depressing ending after all, because no matter what, they will keep struggling until a new generation arises, free from that struggle.